Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always excited to delve into these fascinating stories.
Yeah, so today we're going to look at excerpts from My Mother in Sacrifice, a memoir by Mila. And it's a tribute to her mother, Tatiana.
Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, and just reading through this, I was struck by how much it resonates with the experiences of so many Korean families, especially those scattered across the globe. It really brings to light those shared experiences.
Yeah, definitely. Mila Lee has this way of weaving together the personal and the historical, giving us this really intimate look at what it meant to be Korean in the Soviet Union during such a turbulent time.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that just grabbed me right away was this contrast between Tatiana's childhood and then, well, everything that came after.
Yeah, the shift is pretty dramatic, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. You read about her early years, and it's this idyllic picture. Imagine playing by the Amur River, surrounded by nature, like that classic village life. And then suddenly tragedy strikes. She loses both her parents at 7 years old.
Oh, wow, 7?
Yeah, just a child. And then she's suddenly responsible for her younger siblings. How do you even process that at that age?
It's hard to even fathom. It really makes you think about the resilience of children, their ability to cope with such profound loss and responsibility. To take on the role of caregiver practically overnight. It's remarkable that she not only persevered, but she actually thrived.
Totally. And it makes you wonder how those early experiences shaped her later in life, right? It was that unwavering dedication to family almost ingrained in her from such a young age.
That's an interesting thought. And this theme of resilience, it becomes even more powerful when we look at the forced relocation of Koreans in 1937. Imagine Tatiana, just 15 years old, uprooted from everything she knows, and sent on this brutal journey to Uzbekistan.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the Soviet government was suspicious of Koreans at that time, fearing they might be spies for Japan. It's hard to wrap your head around that level of distrust.
Well, you have to consider the context, right? It was Stalin's regime, and they were notoriously paranoid, constantly on the lookout for internal enemies. Add to that, you have this rising tension in the Far East, with Japan expanding its empire. It created this volatile mix, and unfortunately, the Korean community became an easy target.
It's like they were caught in this web of global politics and just swept up in it. And this fear, it led to this mass deportation. Thousands of Koreans forced onto these horrific journeys, packed into cattle cars. And Mila really doesn't hold back when describing the conditions. Hunger, disease, families being torn apart. Just awful.
It's heartbreaking. And there's this one detail that really stayed with me. The confiscation of passports and documents. It's almost like a deliberate attempt to erase their identity, to cut them off from their history, to make them feel like they belong nowhere.
Oh, yeah. That really hit me, too. Can you imagine the psychological impact of that? To suddenly be stripped of everything that connects you to your homeland.
Yeah, it's devastating. And then they arrive in Uzbekistan with practically nothing, faced discrimination, given the worst land for farming, and yet they managed to not only survive, but thrive. They rebuilt their lives, established these successful farms. They even earned praise from government officials for their agricultural achievements. It's amazing.
It's incredible. It's like they took this terrible situation and turned it into something positive. And, amidst all this rebuilding and resilience, Tatiana meets her future husband, another Korean migrant who had also been through that forced relocation.
Yeah, it's a story of shared experience, isn't it?
It is. And their wedding, as described by Mila, it paints this really beautiful picture of community, of holding on to traditions, even in the midst of hardship.
Yeah, I love that part. The horse-drawn sleigh, the simple gifts, everyone coming together to celebrate. It reminds you that even in the face of adversity, people find ways to find joy, to hold on to their culture.
It's like that saying, making the best of a bad situation, right? They weren't going to let circumstances dictate their happiness. But of course, just as things seem to be settling down, World War II throws another wrench into their lives.
And once again, they're caught in the crosshairs of global politics, right? They were prohibited from serving on the front lines. Instead, they were relegated to these support roles.
So while others are fighting for their country, Tatiana finds herself working in a munitions factory, making tank shells. And her husband ends up with a permanent disability from logging in Siberia. It's just one blow after another.
It's really unfair when you think about it, and it really highlights the ongoing struggles and prejudice they face just because of their ethnicity. But Tatiana's strength, it just shines through. Think about it. She's making weapons for a war that's impacting her family directly. Her husband's injured, and yet she keeps going. She becomes the backbone of the family, raising 7 children. including 4 stepchildren, taking care of her mother-in-law as well.
Wow, that's a lot to handle. When I was reading that, I couldn't help but wonder, did this woman ever sleep?
Well, it's interesting you say that. Mila actually mentions that as a child, she genuinely believed her mother never slept. Like it was just this constant state of motion of putting everyone else's needs before her own.
Yeah, that's a classic mom move, isn't it? Always putting everyone else first.
It is. And it leads us to one of the most powerful examples of Tatiana's selflessness. Her insistence on giving the best food to her children, even when they were struggling to make ends meet.
Right, like the mom always gets the burnt piece of toast kind of thing. But with Tatiana, it's more than that. Mila actually believed her mom preferred the less desirable parts of the chicken. She only realized later in life what her mother was really doing, the sacrifice she was making.
It's subtle, but it's so powerful, that unspoken language of love. The way mothers will put their own needs last and find joy in nurturing their families.
And it makes you think about the impact of that kind of sacrifice, doesn't it? How it shapes the way children see the world, their understanding of love and family.
Absolutely. That's definitely something we can explore further as we delve deeper into Tatiana's story. But before we do, let's pause for a second and just reflect on what we've learned so far. We've seen her resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship, her dedication to her family, and her incredible spirit. It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can find a way to shine through, and that sometimes the most profound acts of love are expressed in the smallest of gestures.
So well said. Okay, so now let's move on to Tatiana's later years and see how that legacy of love and sacrifice continued to shape the lives of her children and grandchildren. Okay, so Tatiana's made it through some incredibly tough times. And now her family's growing, 19 grandchildren. Even great-grandchildren start to appear. You'd think, finally a time for some peace and joy, right? But Mila Lee brings up something that I think a lot of people will relate to. That regret of not having spent enough time with someone you love.
Oh yeah, for sure. That feeling that time just slipped away. And you didn't make the most of it. It really makes you wonder how Tatiana felt about it all. Did she ever have any regrets? Was she content with her life? We don't really get to hear her side of the story, do we?
No, we don't. But Mila focuses on one detail that I thought was really telling. She describes her mother's few possessions. Just some worn dresses and these thin slippers, things most people wouldn't think twice about. But to Tatiana, they were precious, gifts to be treasured.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It really highlights how little she cared about material things. Her focus was always on her family's well-being, not on accumulating stuff. It's pretty inspiring when you think about how much our society emphasizes material possessions.
Totally. It definitely makes you pause and reevaluate your own priorities. Here's this woman who's been through so much hardship, and yet she finds joy in these simple things. Family, connection, the love she shares with those around her.
You're right. It's a powerful reminder that happiness doesn't come from stuff. It comes from those connections, from the people in our lives. And in that sense, you could say Tatiana was actually incredibly rich.
Yeah, I love that. And it's important to remember that her story, while it's deeply personal, it's also intertwined with this larger narrative of the Korean diaspora in Uzbekistan. We've talked about their resilience, their ability to create a new life for themselves in a foreign land. But there's this other layer that I find really fascinating.
You mean her determination for her children to have opportunities she never had?
Exactly. She had this incredible drive to break that cycle of hardship, to give her kids a better future. And despite not having much formal education herself, she prioritized her children's education above all else. Mila describes her mother going without basic necessities to make sure they had music lessons, books, you name it.
Wow. It's that classic immigrant parent story, isn't it? That burning desire to provide a better life for their children, even if it means sacrificing their own comfort.
It really is. And you know what's amazing? It paid off. All of Tatiana's children went on to have successful lives. They got the education she'd always dreamed of. It's really a testament to the power of education and also a mother's unwavering belief in her children's potential.
For sure. And it makes me think about this universal theme of parents wanting more for their kids. That inherent drive to create a better future for the next generation, even if it means making huge sacrifices.
Absolutely. But Tatiana's story also highlights that flip side of the equation, that sense of humility and gratitude that comes from seeing your children thrive.
Right. Even as her kids achieved success, she remained humble, grounded. Her happiness didn't come from material things or recognition. It came from giving to her family, from seeing them flourish.
Yeah, and that's such an important message, especially in today's world. It's so easy to get caught up in that pursuit of material wealth, to measure our worth by external markers. But Tatiana's story reminds us that the most valuable things in life, they aren't things at all. It's love, it's family, it's that resilience of the human spirit, the legacy we leave behind.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that brings us to the heart of what Mila Lee is trying to convey in My Mother and Sacrifice. It's a story that goes beyond cultural boundaries, I think. It speaks to something universal, that profound, enduring love between a mother and her children.
You're so right. It reminds us that even in the face of hardship, the human spirit is capable of incredible things. Love and sacrifice can truly create a ripple effect, shaping lives, families, even communities.
Now, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, I want to shift the focus to you, the listener. Think about everything we've talked about today. Tatiana's incredible sacrifices, the resilience she embodied.
Yeah, think about the people in your own life who have shown you that kind of love and dedication, the sacrifices they've made, the ways they've shaped who you are today. Have you ever stopped to really appreciate it all?
That's a good question to ask ourselves, isn't it? And maybe it leads to another question. How can we honor that legacy of sacrifice in our own lives? What are those small acts of kindness or appreciation that we can offer to those who have given us so much? Yeah, it's easy to forget sometimes, to get caught up in the day-to-day and not take the time to really show our appreciation.
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be anything grand. Sometimes it's just picking up the phone and saying thank you, or living our lives in a way that reflects the values they instilled in us, that hard work, that generosity.
And one of the things that stood out to me about My Mother and Sacrifice was that it wasn't just a story about hardship and struggle, right? It was also this celebration of Korean culture, the strength of the Korean diaspora. I mean, they were forced to relocate, adapt to this new world, and yet they held on to their traditions, their language, their identity.
It's incredible, isn't it? The power of culture and heritage. Even when they were stripped of their homeland, they found a way to hold on to who they were. To keep those traditions alive, pass them down to the next generation.
Makes you wonder how Tatiana felt about it all. If she ever longed for her homeland, the life she could have had.
We can only speculate, right? But what we do know is that she found so much joy in her family, in seeing her children and grandchildren thrive. And that in itself is a kind of triumph, that ability to find meaning and purpose even when life throws you curveball after curveball.
I think you're right. It reminds us that our lives aren't just defined by those difficult moments. It's also about the love we share, those connections we make, the legacy we leave behind.
Oh, well said.
Tatiana's legacy is one of resilience, selflessness, that unwavering love for her family and community. And it's a legacy that continues to inspire everyone who hears her story.
I agree.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Tatiana's extraordinary life, I want to leave you with one final thought. Think about the people in your life who've shown you that same kind of love and dedication. How can you honor their sacrifices, not just with words, but with actions? How can you carry those values of resilience, generosity, and love into your own life? How can you make their sacrifices meaningful, not just for yourself, but for the world around you?
That's a really powerful question, and it's one that we should all take some time to reflect on. I think Tatiana's story is a powerful reminder that even when faced with unimaginable challenges, the human spirit can prevail. And the sacrifices we make for the people we love, they can have a ripple effect. They shape lives, families, communities for generations to come.
Well, folks, that's our deep dive into Tatiana's incredible life, as told through the loving words of her daughter, Mila Lee. We hope this journey is giving you a new appreciation for the power of family, the resilience of the human spirit, and the importance of cherishing the people we love.
It's been an honor to share this story with you all, and we hope it inspires you to think about the sacrifices made by those who came before you and to find ways to keep their legacy alive in your own lives.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.